Crude oil futures just surged 35% in a single week. That is the largest weekly move since oil futures began trading in 1983. The last time we saw volatility even close to this level was in 2020, during the week when the entire global economy essentially shut down. 2 weeks ago, oil was trading around $64 a barrel. Earlier today, it briefly touched $116. Then it suddenly reversed and closed the day at 94.77. After hours, it even fell to 82. Think about that for a moment. Within a single day, oil swung more than $30 per barrel. That is a 26% drop in hours. Many stocks do not move that much in an entire year. So the obvious question is this: why did oil spike so violently and why did it suddenly pull back? Behind the scenes, there is a very important contradiction. And today we are going to break it down using data. But before we go further, if you enjoy deep analysis of global markets and geopolitics, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel and ensures you do not miss future videos. Now let's start with the trigger. Recent military tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran have led to the effective shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway sits between Iran and Oman. At its narrowest point, it is only about 21 miles wide. Yet every day, around 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this single corridor. That is about 20 million barrels per day. And it is not just oil. About 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas shipments also move through this same channel, especially exports from Qatar. Even one-third of global fertilizer trade travels through the strait. For years, analysts have called it the throat of the global energy system. But knowing where the throat is and actually having it squeezed are two very different things. After military actions escalated earlier this year, Iran responded by declaring the Strait of Hormuz closed. Iran's Revolutionary Guard broadcast warnings that ships attempting to pass could be targeted. Since then, several vessels have been attacked. Shipping traffic has collapsed. Normally, around 24 large vessels pass through the strait each day. Now the number has fallen close to zero. And notice that phrase, not half, not 80% lower, close to zero. But here's the detail many people misunderstand. The strait is not physically sealed by mines or missiles. The real reason ships are not moving is much more mundane: insurance. For a tanker to sail through a war zone, the owner must purchase war risk insurance. Under normal conditions, that insurance is a tiny cost. Today, those premiums have increased 12-fold. In many cases, insurers have simply stopped offering coverage entirely. Major maritime insurance groups have suspended policies. Without insurance, ship owners will not move their vessels. Not because captains are afraid, although that matters too. The real issue is financial risk. A fully loaded supertanker can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Without insurance, one accident means the owner absorbs the entire loss. No company will gamble on that, so tankers are waiting for missile threats to decrease, waiting for insurance premiums to fall, waiting for the geopolitical situation to become clearer. But while ships wait, oil continues to be pumped. And oil has to go somewhere. Countries around the Persian Gulf produce oil constantly. Normally, those barrels are loaded onto tankers and shipped out through the strait. Now, those tankers cannot leave, so the oil begins to pile up, storage tanks start filling. And when storage runs out, production must stop. This is not a choice, it is physics. Iraq was the first major producer forced to cut output. The country normally pumps about 4.5 million barrels per day. Now it has reduced production by roughly one-third. Other Gulf producers are also scaling back. If the strait remains closed, analysts estimate that total production cuts across the region could exceed 4 million barrels per day. At the start of this year, most forecasts expected the global oil market to have a surplus of nearly 4 million barrels per day. In other words, a single choke point has turned surplus into shortage. But the story does not end there. The world actually built several layers of defense after past oil crises. These defenses are now being tested. The first defense is alternative pipelines. After the 1973 oil embargo, Gulf states began building land routes to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. The largest is Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline, which carries oil across the desert to the Red Sea. Its theoretical capacity is about 5 million barrels per day. The United Arab Emirates also operates a pipeline that bypasses the strait entirely. Combined, these routes could redirect several million barrels per day. But here is the problem. Theoretical capacity and real capacity are not the same thing. Ports have loading limits. Refineries consume some of the oil along the pipeline, And infrastructure expansions take time. So even if every bypass pipeline runs at full capacity, they cannot fully replace the 20 million barrels per day that normally pass through the strait. The second defense is strategic oil reserves. After the energy shocks of the 1970s, major consuming countries created emergency reserves. Members of the International Energy Agency are required to hold about 90 days of oil imports in storage. The United States, Japan, and many European countries all maintain large strategic reserves. China has also built enormous reserves of its own. If supply disruptions occur, governments can release oil from these stockpiles to stabilize markets. But this solution has limits. Strategic reserves are not automatic. They require political decisions: how much to release, when to release it, and how quickly to refill the reserves later. There is also another complication. Once the oil is released, it is gone. If the underlying supply disruption continues, reserves only buy time. They do not solve the problem. The third defense is market response. When oil prices rise high enough, new supply becomes profitable. Oil production costs vary widely around the world. In the Persian Gulf, production may cost $15 to $20 per barrel. In U.S. shale fields, costs can range between $70 and $90. Deep water drilling or Canadian oil sands can exceed $100. When oil trades at $60, many of these high-cost sources remain inactive. But when prices exceed $100, suddenly these fields become extremely profitable. Capital flows in, drilling increases, and supply expands. In fact, the United States is uniquely positioned here. Unlike Gulf producers, American shale oil does not depend on the Strait of Hormuz. Pipelines connect domestic oil fields directly to refineries and export terminals. But again, there is a catch. This process takes time. Even fast-responding shale production typically requires 4 to 6 months before new wells translate into meaningful output. So, the global oil market now faces a timing gap. Pipelines can partially reroute supply. Strategic reserves can buy time. New production will eventually arrive. But none of these solutions work instantly. That is why analysts are focused on a single variable: how long the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. If the disruption lasts only 1 or 2 weeks, markets can absorb the shock. Oil might fluctuate between $80 and $100. If the closure lasts 1 to 3 months, reserves will begin draining and prices could climb into the 120 to 150 range. And if the disruption extends beyond 3 months, we could face something comparable to the oil crises of the 1970s. That is where the broader economic consequences begin to appear. Higher oil prices feed directly into inflation. Transportation costs rise, manufacturing costs rise, energy bills rise. At the same time, economic growth may slow. This combination has a name: stagflation. And we saw it in the 1970s. Central banks faced rising prices while economies were weakening. Today, there are signs of similar pressure. Gasoline prices in the United States have already climbed sharply. Manufacturing surveys show rising input costs. At the same time, recent employment data suggests economic momentum is cooling. This creates a difficult dilemma for the Federal Reserve. Cut rates too quickly and inflation may surge. Keep rates high and the economy could slide toward recession. Financial markets are watching closely, and oil is at the center of that story. But there is also a longer perspective worth remembering. If you look at every major oil crisis since 1973, one pattern appears again and again. Each crisis ultimately reduces the world's dependence on oil. After the 1973 embargo, consumers switched to more fuel-efficient vehicles. Japanese automakers surged in global popularity. After the 1979 Iranian Revolution, many countries invested heavily in nuclear power. After the 2008 oil price spike, investment in renewable energy and electric vehicles accelerated dramatically. Today, another transition is already underway. Electric vehicles are expanding rapidly. Renewable energy capacity continues to grow, and global supply chains are adapting. In the short term, oil shocks create pain, but in the long term, they often accelerate the shift away from oil itself. So the question today is not only how high oil prices may go, the bigger question is what this crisis may accelerate next: energy transition, infrastructure investment, and geopolitical realignment. History suggests that every energy shock reshapes the global system. The only uncertainty is how quickly. So now I want to hear your view. Where do you think oil prices will be 3 months from now? below $70 or above 120? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this breakdown useful, remember to subscribe. I'm Lynn. I'll see you in the next video.